Hello, welcome back to economics. This week we're going to be talking about markets in our lecture video. We'll be going over demand, supply, and then we'll be putting them all together into an equilibrium. When we're talking about markets, we're talking about buyers and sellers. We're going to represent this usually with a graph, a table, or an equation. I'll show you what all of that looks like. But it's going to be the people who are participating or who would be potentially willing to participate in a particular market. So the market is all buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. So if we're saying the market for coffee in Pasadena, we're talking about people who live in Pasadena, who work in Pasadena, go to school in Pasadena, or somewhere in the vicinity. We wouldn't be talking about people who lived in New York or somewhere else. They're not going to be buying coffee in Pasadena. Markets could be for an individual product, product category, place, or the entire economy. In microeconomics, we're going to focus more on individual products, categories, or places. The entire economy, we get much more into that in macroeconomics, but depending on what you're calling the market, it can be any of these things. Our demand curves and supply curves, these represent a willingness to pay or willingness to accept on the part of our buyers and sellers. And this is called a reservation price. So from the seller's perspective, the reservation price is going to be the minimum they would be willing to sell a particular quantity. It could be the point where they would enter the market. It would be the point maybe where they increase or decrease production. But each reservation price represents the absolute minimum they would sell. They're absolutely willing to take a much higher price than their minimum. And we'll look at profit maximization later in the semester, talk about how they can do that. But it just shows like their cost of production, opportunity cost, all that stuff, the absolute lowest they would be willing to sell. On the buyer's side, their reservation price represents their willingness to pay that maximum buying price, the absolute most they would pay for something. And it represents their value of that particular item. So if we're talking about Disneyland, if you have a reservation price of $300, if ticket prices went up that much, you would be willing to pay $300. Now let's say you go and it's $150, you're going to be happy because you would have paid more, right? So you're getting a good deal, essentially. And reservation prices are going to be different for each person. It has to do with tastes and preferences, income, a whole lot of different factors. And the idea is that we want to try to make good choices as buyers to get the most for our money. So we want to pick the foods and clothing and entertainment and all those different options of things we spend money on to sort of maximize that extra value we get from purchasing. And on the seller side, they're trying to sell things for the highest possible price, produce at that lowest cost, trying to maximize profit. In some of our markets, buyers and sellers may have some market power. They may have some influence over the actual price and quantity that ends up being produced or purchased. In a lot of our markets, they don't have a say. It's based on everybody's combined preferences and availability, and we will definitely get into that. We could talk about egg markets. So, over the last few years, there have been some egg shortages, bird flu, some issues with egg prices rising a lot. And in some areas near Pasadena, it might be $12 or $20 for a dozen eggs. You may go to the store, there might not even be any eggs. And you're wondering who's going to buy eggs for $12. Well, if you have a high reservation price, you need those eggs. It's a really important part of your life. Maybe you're a parent and you have a toddler who will only eat eggs and you do not want them to starve to death. You may pay $20 for a dozen of eggs. On the seller side, we're going to look at how, there's maybe some temporary shortages or other things that may cause prices to spike. But if for some reason we were having long-term trends and people were always willing to pay $12 for an egg, maybe demand went up or something else changed in the market, we may see more farmers willing to produce eggs because that price indicates there's such a high value on this item as an economy. So we're going to look at all these different things. We're going to figure out how buyers and sellers' preferences and reservation prices work together to decide the actual price and quantity that happens in the market. We are going to start here with demand. At the end of demand, I'm actually going to stop this video and I will start a new video for supply. At the end of supply, I'm going to stop that video and then start a new one for equilibrium. That way you can go back to each topic, check what you need to check. It'll be easier to find stuff, and you don't necessarily have to sit through this whole video. All right, so demand. It could be a schedule, a graph, or an equation. So this table over here, this is called a demand schedule, and it lists all of the different points, prices, and quantities. You could take this and turn it into a graph. We have a graph, which is this right here. You could see we've got price on our y-axis, quantity on our x-axis, and then we have this downward sloping line, which actually is our demand curve. So all of our things are going to be downward sloping when we're talking about demand, because price and quantity are inversely related. So you could see in our equation here, we've got quantity demanded is equal to 400 minus 6p. It could also look like this. Price is equal to 700 minus 8qd. So it doesn't really matter which side the p and the q are on, but you're going to see that both of these are negative. On our table, you'll see that when prices are going up, right, our quantity demanded is going down. So 160 to 140, 140 to 120, right? It's decreasing. Okay, so price is increasing, then quantity demanded is decreasing. So these have an inverse relationship. It's downward sloping. They move in opposite directions. There are a bunch of reasons for this. You could think about how consumers prefer if stuff is cheaper. If you go to the store and you see your favorite drink and it's half price, you might buy twice as many. The substitution and income effects are sort of the way that economists explain why this is downward sloping. So the substitution effect says that as the price of one good changes, it makes other goods relatively cheaper or more expensive. So the assumption is that if the price changes in one market and the prices stay the same in the other markets, it affects the relativity of the prices of those items. And we've talked a little bit about relativity in this class so far. Sometimes we're actually really bad at attributing value to something. How much do I like this cup of coffee? How much do I like this apartment versus that apartment? How much do I like those shoes? And we're not really good at that. So we do relative comparisons. How much do I like this cup of coffee versus that cup of coffee? I can compare those price differences. And so the substitution effect says, let's say this is a market for coffee, and it is $5 in our market. Prices go up to $6. We're going to see that our consumers are going to buy less. Quantity goes from 60 to 50. So price increase of $1 leads to a quantity of loss of negative 10. And it's not because we don't like coffee anymore. It's because now the other options we have seem relatively cheaper. So if my coffee is $6, maybe now it's more worth it for me to go buy something else instead. And then similarly, the income effect says that when prices change, it makes us relatively richer or poorer. So if the price of my coffee goes up, I just have to buy less because now the money I have is not worth as much, right? I can't buy as much stuff if all the prices go up. Or if prices go down, I'm relatively richer. I can buy more stuff with the dollars that I have. And so we're going to see this inverse relationship. As that price drops, that quantity demanded goes up. As the price increases, quantity demand goes down. When we say demand, we're talking about the whole line, right? The entire curve, the entire market. Demand is talking about all possible prices and quantities in that market. When we talk about quantity demanded, we're just talking about one particular point. So the quantity demanded at $7 is 20, or the quantity demanded at $3 is 100. Or on this graph, our quantity demanded at $5 is 60, and our quantity demanded at $6 is 50. So quantity demanded is a specific number at a specific price. Demand means the whole market. So we will get into this more, but we're not going to say like if price goes up, demand goes down. Demand actually stayed the same. It was just that quantity demanded changed. And in a couple slides, we'll talk about what makes this whole line move, so what an increase or decrease in demand actually means. This is based on the reservation price of the buyers in the market. So demand represents the buyer side. In product markets, which is what we'll probably be talking about for the most part, the demand comes from the household side. We also will get into labor markets, which is a resource or factor market. And in that case, for the labor market, demand comes from the employers. So demand is just whoever happens to be buying the particular item in the market. So if we're talking about teachers, the demand for teachers, the demand is going to come from the schools. And the supply of teachers would come from households. If we're talking about hats, we would say that the demand for hats is coming from households and the supply is coming from the hat makers. Okay. So demand is going to always be buyers, but whether or not that's companies or households depends on what type of market we're talking about. So the law of demand says that as the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. We'll talk about some exceptions to this in just a second, but for the most part, almost always, this is just going to be the case. Sometimes we've got flatter curves or steeper curves. We'll talk about how this is going to impact the ability of firms to raise and lower prices. But the idea is that it's always going to be this inverse relationship and consumers prefer cheap prices. Prices drop, we want to buy more stuff. The demand curve can also shift. So a shift in demand means that it's going to increase or decrease. So if we say we have more demand for a product, what that means is that our demand has shifted to the right. We have an increase in demand. It's further out away from the origin, we have a higher quantity demanded at every single price. And if we say decrease in demand, that means that that curve is shifting to the left. So the whole line is moving over to the left. At every particular price, we've got a lower quantity demanded. So what's going to cause the curve to shift? So it's not price, okay? So we saw on the last slide that a price change just leads to another point on the same curve. Different quantity demanded, right? Quantity demanded changes, not the whole line. So if we start at point A and price goes up, we'll go to point D. Price goes down, we'll go to point F. Okay, so price change is only going to move along the same curve, same line. For the whole line to shift, something else has to change. So something else that has fundamentally determined where that line was already. And we're going to go over those categories right now. These things are going to be specific to just the demand side. We're mostly talking about this from a product market standpoint, so where households are the buyers. But some of these things can apply even if we're talking about labor markets. So first is going to be the price of complements or the price of substitutes. So these are related goods. Let's say we're talking about, we'll say this is our market for burgers. And a complement is going to be something that you buy with a burger. And a substitute is something that you buy instead of a burger. So let's start with complements. So let's say our complement is French fries. So here's our demand for fries. We're going to say that people generally buy burgers and fries together. And this doesn't have to be true for every single person or every single instance, but we just know as a trend, typically people buy these things together. So if the price of French fries goes up, okay, so price of fries increases, we're going to see a movement along our French fry curve. And it's also going to cause a decrease in our demand for burgers. Because now it's just more expensive to buy this together. And if I have to buy these things together, if fries are more expensive, I'm just going to buy less burgers, even if the price of burgers stayed the same. So for a complement, if the price of a complement goes up, the demand for the related good is going to decrease, shift to the left. And the opposite is also true. So if the price of fries goes down, then demand for burgers is going to go up. Substitutes is going to be the opposite. So substitute would be something we purchase instead of. So let's say instead of a burger, I'm going to get pizza. So here's my demand for pizza. We're going to say that the price of pizza is going to decrease. So pizza has gotten cheaper. Price of pizza is dropping. Okay, if price of pizza is dropping, I am going to demand less burgers because I'm going to switch. I'm going to substitute over and buy more pizza. Okay, so if the price of a substitute decreases, then my demand for burgers is also going to decrease. And then the opposite is also true. So if price of pizza goes up, then my demand for burgers is going to go up. If the price of burgers changes, that's just going to move me to a different point on the same burger curve. Okay, so price of the item in that market changes, it's a movement along the curve like we see for pizza. The price of burgers changes, it's a movement along the burger curve. But since these are related goods, if the price of pizza changes, it's going to shift that demand curve for burgers. Consumer income also matters. If we have more income, we're going to increase demand. So income goes up, demand is going to increase. Shift to the right. Now on the next slide, we're going to talk about if it's a normal versus inferior good. I'm not going to get into that just yet. We're going to assume that this is a normal good. Sorry, I keep clicking things. Normal good, so if your income goes up, you want to buy more of it. If your income goes down, you're going to buy less of it. Consumer tastes and preferences are a big part of demand. So if we liked something, we're going to want more of it. This can happen if something is a trend, so Beanie Babies or Labubus or whatever fashion item or whatever is popular. All of a sudden, we like it a lot more. Maybe it's a status symbol, and it's going to increase our demand. So taste and preferences increase. We're going to say we'd like it more. That's going to increase demand. Shift it to the right. If we like it less, taste and preferences decrease. Say something comes out that says burgers are really unhealthy and you shouldn't eat them. If you eat burgers, you'll fail all of your exams. Students will be like, well, we're not eating burgers anymore. We don't like them. It's going to decrease demand. Population is also going to shift demand. So the number of people in your community or in that market are going to make a difference. If you have a growing population, it's going to shift demand to the right. If you have a shrinking population, it's going to shift demand to the left. Buyer expectations of future prices also matter. For something like burgers, maybe, or other types of food, we have a very small time horizon. So I'm not going to just be like, well, I think burgers are going to be cheaper in 6 months, so I'm going to wait to buy a burger for 6 months. If I want a burger, I'm going to buy it now. Maybe if it's going to be cheaper tomorrow or it's going to be cheaper after 5, I might wait a little bit. We could talk about like Black Friday sales. These happen typically in November, the end of November. And this is where a lot of items are on sale. Electronics, TV, all sorts of Christmas items, gift things. If it is January and you want to buy a new TV, you might not really care about the fact that there's going to be a Black Friday sale in November. Maybe you expect prices to go down, maybe you don't. It's not going to do anything. You might not want to wait that long. However, if it is September or October, and you know that this is happening starting November 1st, you expect prices to drop. So prices go down next month. You are going to decrease your demand today. because you want to save that demand for the future when you think prices are going to be lower. So if you expect prices to drop, you're going to decrease your demand today. So this market is always reflecting what's going on right now. This is today's market. And so our future expectations impact what we do today. If you expect prices to go up, so maybe you don't necessarily need a new TV, but it's already November 25th, and you're thinking, should I get a new TV? This Black Friday sale is about to end. Like, definitely next month or next week, prices are going to go way back up. You might actually increase your demand today for a TV because you're expecting prices to go up. Okay, so buyers, if they think prices are going to go up in the future, they buy more now. If they think prices are going to go down in the future, they buy less right now. This happens with the housing market all the time. So if you huge purchase, if you think housing prices are going to drop next year, you might wait another year. You're going to reduce your demand right now. If you think this is the lowest they're going to get and they're only going to keep going up and up and up, you might increase your demand and buy a house faster. These are typically the only categories we're going to talk about that cause a shift in demand. These are also the things that help our demand curve land where it did in the first place. And we're just going to assume maybe one thing changes at a time. We will be looking at this in some different contexts. But for demand to change, for the whole line to move, something needs to change in one of these categories. And we'll see in our next video for supply that for the supply curve to move, something has to change related to supply. So it's going to be totally different stuff. And every shift needs its own curve. Its own cause. Every shift needs its own cause. So if you're going to say demand increases and then demand decreases, that means two things had to change from this list. We will be talking a lot about goods and services this semester. Just wanted to go over some of those definitions and then talk about some of the weird things that happen in demand, some of those exceptions. So normal goods are things where demand increases as your income increases or decreases as your income drops. This is going to be most products, so clothing, restaurant meals, vacations, stuff that you normally buy. If you get more money and you're going to buy more of it, it's a normal good. An inferior good, this is a much smaller segment of the market, but this is goods where demand increases when your income drops, or if you get a raise at work, you have more money, your demand is actually going to decrease. Some examples are like used clothing or the really cheap ramen noodles, stuff that you buy because it's cheaper, not because you necessarily like it more. And when we're talking about this stuff or complements, substitutes, any of that, we're talking about generally what happens in the market overall. So you're always going to be able to think of some exceptions to this. And it doesn't have to be true for every person in the market. It just has to be what's happening in the market overall. Like for instance, cheap ramen noodles. I get these on subscription from Amazon, delivered giant boxes to my house every month because I eat lots of them and my kids eat lots of them. They're easy, they're cheap, I like them. It's not an inferior good for me. As my income has risen, I possibly even buy more of these now. However, for the whole market, it's the opposite. You eat it because it's cheap. You eat it when you're a college student. Once you have a better job, you go out to a restaurant and you get much better ramen. We're also going to be looking at elasticity in the next couple weeks. And I'll show you how we can actually calculate some values to figure out if something is a normal or inferior good, so you won't necessarily have to guess just based on intuition. We also are going to have some oddly behaving goods. These are things that do not follow the law of demand. They actually have an upward sloping demand curve. These are very rare. They're very specific to certain cases, certain regions. It does not happen very often. The first is called a Giffen good. It defies the law of demand. This, let's draw an upward sloping demand curve here. Price is over here, quantities down here. This happens when the price of a good drops and the quantity demanded also drops. This is typically for goods that are inferior goods. And they are taking up a large portion of the household budget. So this is going to be something like rice or potatoes, something where you've got a very low income family or community or country, and they spend a lot of their money on a very basic ingredient for survival. And they're not spending that much on rice because they like rice that much. It's because they need calories and that's what they can afford. So an example might be the price of rice decreases and families buy less rice now and they go buy more shrimp or protein or something else that they prefer. This doesn't really happen very much, so think of rice or potatoes, pasta, things that you can get very cheaply. It has to be an inferior good, and there's not very many good real-life examples of this. Same thing with a Veblen good. Very rare scenario. This is going to happen when the price rises. So we've got this increase in price and an increase in the quantity demanded. This is going to happen for luxury goods that are status-seeking. Having a higher price makes it more exclusive. This is not going to be true for all luxury goods or all just really expensive stuff. So most expensive products follow typical demand, like the downward sloping demand curve. They follow those typical patterns. It's just where people would actually prefer to pay a higher price for something, it's going to make it a Veblen good. So if you're like, oh, the price went up, I want to buy more of those now. Some examples would be like Birkin bags. Not all of them. So they have like the normal ones they sell for $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000, and then they have a couple exclusive ones where they maybe only make 1 or 2 or 5 of that entire style. And recently in my life, maybe not in yours, there was a guy named Vegas Dave, and he purchased a Birkin bag for $500,000. He wanted to make it the most expensive bag. He actually kept bidding up the price higher and higher to make sure he was paying more for this bag than anybody had ever paid. So like paying more was part of the draw for him. Okay, so other expensive goods, luxury cars, watches, all that stuff, people will still buy more of it when the price drops typically. So it has to be pure status seeking, something where it's extremely exclusive, and having a higher price makes people want it even more. Services, unlike goods, are not tangible items. It's not going to be a physical thing that you get. It's going to be an action or task performed for the customer. If you're talking about eating at a restaurant, the food that you get is a good, normal good. So I'm going to go to the restaurant, I'm going to order a hamburger, that's going to be a good. However, the service that I paid for was having somebody cook that burger for me and bring it to my table, wash my dishes, bring me drinks. You have someone mow your lawn, that's a service. Cut your hair, like anything where someone's doing an action or a task for you and not providing an actual physical good. A lot of times these things are mixed, so goods and services can happen at the same time. And a lot of times they'll be separate. And we will get into some of these a little bit more later, but sometimes I'll say goods and services, sometimes just goods, just services, but I wanted to make sure that we all knew what was going on here. Okay, so that is the end of our lecture on demand. I will see you in our next video for supply.